Now these are grow lights I've literally had for over a decade, and they're quite old, and as you can see, these are the old-fashioned fluorescents. This new light I've purchased, not necessarily a grow light, this is a shop light, but it is LED, and that makes a huge difference. You're not going to have as much heat output, so you don't have to worry about scorching seeds. Also, it's going to put out the right amount of light. These can become weaker over time, these fluorescent bulbs, and they're very expensive to change out. So my first recommendation is stay away from fluorescent bulbs and switch over to LEDs. You're going to get just as good of results from LEDs as you can with these other grow lights, but this was extremely expensive, and I won't be purchasing any more of these. Like I said, this was over a decade ago, probably close to 15 years. So when you go into the store and you're shopping for these lights, you want to look for anywhere from 5,000 to 6,500 K, and that should be on the packaging. Sometimes it's listed on the light itself. If you don't have a local place to shop for just ordinary shop lights, I'll put a link in the description. What I want to say first is some of these grow lights can be so inexpensive. If you buy enough of these, you can get the per light cost of under $10. I saw a pack of 12 and it brought the cost of these down to around $8 per light, but you're gonna have to buy 12 grow lights. I'll put a link in the description, but just remember, that's the first thing you're looking for is the proper number. And I'm going to explain some of these terms later on. I'll put them up on the screen because some of them are very technical words, but just remember, that's the first thing we're looking for. Now, along the light spectrum of colors, what we're wanting is a kind of a bluish leaning light, and that's where daylight or the most brightest color is going to come from in these lights. So you don't want maybe a warm white or anything like that. You want the cool white or daylight varieties. Now, I know that warm white for our eyes, for human eyes, is more comfortable, and sometimes these pure daylight colors can be extremely bright to us, but that's what you're going to need for compact vegetable or flower growth is the daylight variety. So make sure you're leaning towards that. Some of these have a selectable switch. This particular model can actually select between 3 different varieties, and what I'm saying is that if you do have that option, that's great, but remember to go with daylight lights on the LEDs. Now, specifically what I mentioned earlier about the 5,000 to about 6,500 of the 5,000 6,500K, you're going to produce that blue leaning light on the light spectrum, and that's what a lot of seed starting guides are going to recommend, anywhere from 5,000 to 6,400. Some seeds actually give you that specific information, and sometimes you can look it up online. So just remember, you're looking for that sweet spot on your lights to make sure that it's not too bright, which I don't think it's going to matter all that much since you're starting from seed. But if you don't have that at least minimum number of 5,000K, I don't think you're going to have as much success starting your seeds, because you need that compact growth right out of the start, and the lights won't be reaching up too high for a light that's too weak. Now, one more note about the blue area of the light spectrum is that the blue spectrum is what it needs for proper growth. If you don't have the blue light shining on them properly, and maybe you're a little bit more towards the red spectrum, that's a problem, because you're going to have more leggy growth and possible fall over of the plants. You don't need the red part of the spectrum yet, because you're going to get that once you remove them from your garage or your basement, or in this case your greenhouse. Once you get them outside, that's going to be more focused on the flowering stage of the plant. So what we're aiming for right now is that blue light that's going to help with initial growth of your seedlings. Now, in part 2 here, I'm going to talk about lumens. We want to have our fluorescent light in lumens between 3,500 and 5,000 per 4 foot, if I can say that properly, 4-foot light fixture. Sometimes you'll see different shapes on these, but I actually prefer the 4-foot fixture. I've seen some that have all kind of branches and they're circular and things like that. But for me, with these type of trays, I can have 2 trays back to back on one 4-foot light, or even 2 if I feel like that particular seed variety needs more light. So again, 3,500 to 5,000 lumens per light. And all this data is usually in the piece of paper that comes with it, your guide or whatever you want to call it. And sometimes it's actually in a sticker on the light fixture itself. In this case, these did not have that information there, but once I dug into the box, I found all the information printed out on the sheet that came with it. Now, shop lights often list instead of PPFD, and I'll put the meaning of that right here on the screen, they list it in lumens. And that's why, another thing, when you're buying specific grow lights, you might see it as that. But in the shop light, it's going to be listed as lumens. So just remember, don't get discouraged if you can't find what some grow lights have on their detailed information, because if you have enough lumens, as I just said in that number that we just talked about, you'll be just fine. But you'll need to remember that you'll need to look at lumens instead of the ppfd. Now, headed into part 3, I want to talk about hanging the shop lights directly over your ceilings. Generally, you're going to be hanging shop lights closer to the soil level than you would on the grow lights, and using these little chains that come with these makes it a lot easier. I have a lot of wooden benches, but also have a lot of the pre-packaged shelving units that are basically just made for garage shelving, and so I have a limited amount of space on those. On these I have a much broader area where I can let my seedlings grow much taller. But each one of these shop lights comes with a chain like this. They also come with these J hooks that you could put directly into wood, and also I had to buy these S hooks separately, so I'll put links to all 3 of those down. These S hooks are great if you have multiple shelves, whether it's aluminum shelving or plastic shelving. This makes it a lot easier, and you can adjust your chain a lot easier than using a string or something where you're actually tying it, because you're having to untie it and do that. So just unhooking it and moving it up as your seedlings start to sprout and grow taller. So whenever I'm starting my seeds, I'm going to be hanging these lights about 2 inches directly above the soil line. Generally, these shop lights are going to have a lower PAR. I'm going to put on the screen what PAR is rather than to give you all this technical information, so you can just take a quick glance, press pause, and you can read it for yourself. But again, when I'm first starting the seeds, right above soil level, 2 inches. So with LED lights, the further away you have it from the soil level, your light intensity drops very quickly, and that's why a lot of times those super expensive grow lights have a much higher ppfd, and so you kind of compensate for that by having the light much closer to the soil level. Again, remember, we're trying to prevent leggy growth and weak growth. We want it to come out as strong as possible from the soil level, so just remember, distance compensates for those super expensive fixtures. So I'm moving on to part 4 here, and we're talking about the time interval between on and off on cycle. You're not running these 24 hours a day. I would recommend, if you're using these LED shop lights, to do between 14 to 16 hours per day. And one of the key components is having a really good timer like this. It shuts on, shuts off. It's very easy to set up. I'll put a link in the description. Also, if you have multiple lights, you can link these together. There's actually a plug on this end and my cord is on this end, so I can hook up 5 or 6 lights all in a row. Make sure that you don't exceed the capacity of your breakers, because you will trip your breaker if you hook up, let's say, 25 or 30 of these lights at a time. But if you're only doing 5 or 6, you should be just fine on an ordinary plug. But that's what I love doing. I love hooking them all up together and just having one timer, so it shuts on, runs for that 12 to 14 hour, 16 hour period, whatever type of seeds I got going, and it shuts off. And so these are only, I believe, 40 watts each, so I'm not using a lot of power, and it's not going to drive up my energy cost tremendously. So maybe a more scientific way of talking about the timer is daily light integral. And so what we're talking about is the number of photons that hit the seedlings as they sprout out in a 24-hour period. That is an important thing that we have to take into account when you're using a cheaper shop light. So that's why on an expensive grow light, you may only be using it for 8 to 10 hours a day, but the cost of the grow light itself is going to be offset by the cheapness of these lights. The less cost of these are going to make it much more worth it to start seeds indoors. A lot of people will wait till they're past their last frost date and they won't start seeds indoors because of the cost of the expensive grow lights. But I'm trying to get everybody to realize that you can use something that's not so expensive. I've seen expensive grow light setups for well over $200 or $300 for one light. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to focus your attention to a much cheaper cost and an easier way to do this, where you're not burdening your wallet quite so much. Now, what I do recommend, as I said in the very beginning of the video, is buying a multi-pack so you can spread your light across multiple trays, or you could put 2 lights above the trays. That can offset the cost, and you can spread the light photons evenly across rather than having one super expensive setup. So the great thing about LEDs is that it spreads the photons evenly under each light fixture. The old-fashioned LEDs, you'll often have more of a hot spot where the plants will kind of lean towards that or grow inward towards that. So LEDs is the way to go. So if you're looking at fluorescent shop lights and maybe thinking that's the way to go, I would absolutely discourage fluorescent shop lights and go with the LEDs. So number 6, I want to say you want to look for a wide beam angle on your shop lights, at least 120 degrees. So my next point, number 8, is to use aluminum foil or mylar. I think aluminum foil is better, but you're going to drape it over the light down to the edges of your seedling tray, and you'll reflect even more light on there in the initial stages of growth. So once it's popped out, you can remove that aluminum foil. But again, I think that the shiny side of the aluminum foil is the best one to use. You have kind of a dull side and you have a shiny side. Use the shiny side where it's facing inward to your seeds, where it puts even more light to the tray. And that can also help with warmth. It can keep a little bit of the warmth from escaping. As you're really close, you'll just drape it right over the top. Now you want to focus on PAR, even though these shop lights are not marketed that way and it may not be clear on the outside of the packaging. You can probably look through all the technical data on the little page that comes with it. But you want to focus on 400 to 700 nm, and I'll put that exactly what that means right here. But that's, again, even though these are shop lights, they still emit that proper PAR. Now, one of the things I do when I'm starting my seeds, I take all of my plastic shelving and then I stack it back up. Right now I have it kind of spread out because of the bonsai and they take up a huge amount of space. But when I'm starting seeds, I will put one of these on each shelf and have it 4 to 6 high, depending on how many seeds I'm starting for that year. One thing that you need to be very careful of, make sure you have a humidity tray on each pack, because you don't want water getting into the top of these lights. It could cause some damage to them. So just remember that we're putting one on each shelf, not just one in there. Another thing you can do if you have a very tall shelf is you can add some insulation to the outside, some plastic sheeting, and that will conserve heat. When you're talking about conserving heat, if it's seeds that require much more bottom heat, I always recommend using these heat mats. I'll put a link to these as well. But these I have are probably well over 10 years old. They've been working great. I only use them in the springtime when I'm starting seeds. So heat, light, and the proper amount of water is the key to getting your seeds started off to a really good start. So just remember, building that kind of inexpensive shelving system can make a huge difference in your seed success starting. Now, as I said earlier in the video, I just want to make this point one more time. If you're purchasing these from your local hardware store, on this end, I'll try to show it to you right there, is a plug. And what you want to do is make sure that your shop lights can be linked together, because there's nothing worse than having 5 or 6 of these shop lights and you're having to run cords to each one of them. This is a pretty standard thing now, but just remember, look for that. I want to remind you of that, because you get it home and suddenly you realize you have to run 5 to 6 extension cords to 5 to 6 different lights, which is really tough when you have only a 2-plug outlet in something like my greenhouse. Now next I want to talk about adjusting the height above your seedlings. Now, in this chart right here, I've created 1, 2, 3, and week 4, so you'll know exactly what distance you need above each plant. Like I said, you can download this to your device. You can make a hard copy like this. You can quickly read through it. It's understandable. It's only a few pages long, so just take a look at that. If you're already a member of the Patreon, you can get it for free and just keep it forever. So each time you're starting your seeds, you can keep that form somewhere close to your seed trays, and then at the end of the year it'll remind you, or the beginning of the year it'll remind you how close you need to have it throughout the initial stages of the growth and germination of your seeds. On these shop lights, I said that sometimes I might consider doing 2, and that's only on a very specific type of seed I'm starting. Generally, I can get away with just 1 of these shop lights per shelf. Generally, seeds need just a smaller amount of ppfd than mature plants. Mature plants may require more, and so that's why a lot of professional growers have those really high dollar setups. But since we're just starting from seed, a simple shop light will work fine for what you need, and just 1 light per shelf. Now, if the rain outside is getting more intense, and so if it's picking up on the mic, I'm sorry about that. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the heat in these fixtures. LEDs put out minimal heat. The old fluorescent tubes, you could actually get a little bit of scorch if your seedlings came too close to them. So remember, if you're starting this in a greenhouse, a garage, or a basement, you may have to make sure the temperatures are proper for your seed development. If your garage or basement or your greenhouse is too cold, you may have failure in high germination failure rates. So just remember, there's also a heat component that you're not going to get from LEDs that you might have gotten in the past from fluorescent bulbs. Now, a lot of people will buy these shop lights without this white diffuser, and what that diffuser will do for your plants it spreads the photons more evenly across the canopy of your seed tray, so you'll have more even growth. So if I have a chance to choose between one that has this diffuser or one where I can actually see the LED lights directly, I'm going to go with the diffuser because, like I said, you'll just get better photon distribution. Basically, it's just a fancy way of saying you get better light distribution across the entire seed tray. Now, we have to accept the limitations of shop lights. They're excellent for seed starting in the initial stages of germination, but this is not for the flowering stage or the more mature stages. Once that comes along, then you need to plan anyways on transitioning those outside, getting them used to being outdoors. You'll move them in and out periodically, let them spend the day outside, nice sunlight, well above freezing temperatures, and then you move them back in at night. You're going to do that for anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to allow them to acclimate to the outside temperatures. If you suddenly just take them outside and you don't think there's going to be more freezing temperatures, even if it's not freezing, sometimes that sudden change in temperature can be a shock to the plant. So we just want to kind of increase the hours each day that we're taking them outside and bringing them back in, so that way we don't have a germination failure or a seedling failure across our entire tray. So guys, as I mentioned again, you can look at this chart. It gives a lot of information about the shop lights, how to set it up, the distance from the seed trays and everything else. It costs $1 if you're not a member of the Patreon. If you are a member of the Patreon, you can download it for free. Have a lot of stuff for members that you can download for free, some videos, but that's the thing, is I always charge a little bit extra if you're not a member, because it does take a little bit of time to put all this information together. Guys, I really appreciate you watching. If you got something out of this video, I hope you'll give me a thumbs up and maybe a comment or maybe a suggestion to make it even better. I really appreciate you watching, and have a great day.